It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Craig, there is some interesting news coming out of Georgia these days regarding the 2022 election there. First is the most recent news that the former GOP Senator David Perdue, with Donald Trump's blessing, will be challenging current Governor Brian Kemp in the Republican primary. And that follows the news that Stacey Abrams, who was credited with leading that state's most successful voter registration a few years ago, will be running for that office as well. Can you give us your impressions right now on where Georgia is and their political state of affairs?
I picked a good one for us this morning. This is kind of a sort of political theater that brings all these forces together. I thought I'd choose as my backdrop a scene from Georgia that's very calm, relaxing, and full of azaleas, because the political scene is anything but those things. It's going to be quite a contest. Let me make a couple of points. You outlined the characters well. First of all, a race that involves an incumbent, especially a governor, really has to be viewed as a referendum, and the voters will decide in November whether the sitting governor, Brian Kemp, whether he deserves another 4 years. And so I think the question is, how's he done this? In his first term, more than anything else, he's going to have to fight off this challenge, as you point out, from former Senator David Perdue, a 70-some-year-old former businessman who lost his Senate seat in 2020. And if he's successful there, he will then be challenged by, or whoever is successful there, by Stacey Abrams, a political activist in Georgia, somebody who served in the state house, actually was the minority leader for a number of years in Georgia. She lost to Brian Kemp in 2018 and went on to build quite a force in Georgia that is credited with helping Biden win the state, carry the state, and saw the election of two Democratic U.S. senators. And so she's formidable. Kemp, it should be said, also has held statewide office, was Secretary of State for 2 terms, well known in the state, well known by Republicans in the state, a conservative. This is not a contest over his issues and his policy preferences versus Perdue's, as much as it is the peak of one former president, Donald Trump, who is upset because Brian Kemp didn't try to reverse the election for him in the state of Georgia. So very confounding, lots of speculation, people lining up on every side of this equation. I listened to some of the messaging coming out of Brian Kemp's campaign, and it validates this notion that he's going to run a campaign as though it were a referendum on his first term, because he says, I've pretty much done everything in my first term that I said I would do, and I want a second term for the opportunity to come back and do even more. So his campaign is messaging that he wants a second term to come back and do even more to help the state improve its economy, where he says it's the best state in the nation for business. He says that it's the best place to live. He says it's the best place to raise a family. So where have we heard those kinds of issues before? I think Virginia, strong economy, strong family values, great place to live. And I think he's setting up for a run against, in many ways, Stacey Abrams, who in some ways, I mentioned Virginia, in some ways may have the Terry McAuliffe factor, in that she's become someone of a national prominence in the Democratic Party. And I don't know how well that will play in Georgia. I don't know whether, yes, she's an organizer, yes, she's been involved, but I think if the national spotlight hits her in a race against in Georgia, I don't know that helps her. And the other thing Kemp has going for him is that he will have a track record as governor. And if the facts are anything close to what he's saying in his campaign message, when you get to next year and things have improved, he'll contrast his 4 years with Biden's first 2 years, and argue that what you don't need is somebody who's close to Biden. Then we have the Trump factor, and the argument made by some. I saw even Newt Gingrich making this argument, who's decided to support David Perdue, is that David Perdue with Trump's help will bring out the Republicans, and that Kemp can't do that because he didn't support Trump. And as I've said on this space before, I think Trump's influence and impact is in a decline, and I don't really think that argument is all that strong. It's if you want to align yourself with Trump for some reason, supporting Perdue is a way to do it. I'm not sure it's going to get Perdue over the finish line. So I'm going to turn this over to Al with the prediction that Kemp trumps Perdue and Trump, and faces Stacey Abrams in a race which he wins for a second term in November 2022.
Al, do you agree with that assessment? And if so, what does this mean for the Trump brand?
I don't quite agree with the assessment. I think the Trump brand is diminishing, but whether it's diminished so it's less than half the Republican primary electorate is another question. It might diminish from 80% of the primary vote to 60, but it's still enough to win. I mean, look, Georgia should be a cakewalk for the Republicans in a year like 2022. The president has low approval ratings. People are feeling sour about the pandemic and the economy, the way the country's going. And you've got an incumbent Republican governor. But as I said last week, the only thing that can save the Democrats next year is what I call a perfect storm. And that means the pandemic has to largely be behind us. We don't know where we'll be in a year. The economy has to be looking better, but basically people have to be feeling better about the country. But most importantly, Donald Trump, in his effort to seek revenge against anybody who hasn't supported his false claims that he won the 2020 election, gets involved and backs candidates who can win Republican primaries, but would have a very hard time in the general. What I'm hearing from the people I talk to inside the state of Georgia is that Georgia could well be that perfect storm. The Republicans are going to have bloody primaries, both for governor and for the United States Senate seat, particularly the gubernatorial primary. When David Perdue entered this week and he got a statement of endorsement from Trump, he did an interview with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution where he just, annihilated Brian Kemp. It doesn't pretend to be a particularly gentlemanly like primary. And I don't think it's clear who's going to win. I mean, I'm not in Georgia, but I talked to the two people I most trust about Georgia politics who have won statewide campaigns several times, and they're split. One believes that Perdue, because of Trump, will win that primary, he said by double digits. The other believes that, that Kemp's going to win the primary. But what they both agree on, it's going to be hard to get the Republicans to get together and be excited in November. And that should benefit Stacey Abrams. Stacey Abrams is, Craig's right, she does have this danger of being a national candidate, and that doesn't always work in state races. But she's not an ordinary candidate. One of my friends, who I most respect, said she's a force of nature who can defy the political laws of gravity. But she's going to have to take advantage of the opportunity that the split Republican Party gives her. And what that means is she's going to have to define herself as progressive, yes, but a progressive centrist on issues like crime, education, and healthcare. And if she does that, she should have a good chance to win. That's important because the Republicans from day one are going to try to tie her with the most radical positions in the Democratic Party, like defunding the police. She opposes that, but she's got to be crystal clear about that so people understand that she does, and she's not, and that she defines herself, and she doesn't let him or the Republicans define her. You know, I believe we're going to get good Democratic turnout. You're going to have Abrams and Senator Warnock leading the Democratic ticket. We've got a good young woman running for Attorney General. Stacey Abrams will have help in important quarters. She played a big role in Michelle Nunn's campaign for Senate a few years ago. And so while the Sam Nunn crowd, obviously, it's getting up there, is not exactly what it was, it's still an important factor among swing voters that she's going to need. Look, the Senate primary is going to be bitter as well. Trump has picked Herschel Walker, the football star, greatest football player in the history of the state, to run, and he's running against, I guess, a more traditional Republican, Gary Black, the agriculture commissioner. And again, on this one, my sources agree. They think that Walker will win the primary and likely lose the general. Now, having said that, you got to realize Georgia's an almost evenly divided state, and it's tough territory for Democrats in an off year. To win, Democrats need to cross what I call the 30-30 threshold. They need to get 30% of the turnout has to be Black vote, and the candidate has to win 30% of the white vote. Last time, Stacey Abrams, which ran against Kemp, won 25% of the white vote. That's not enough. It came close, but it's not enough to get over the top. With a fractious Republican primary this year, hopefully, if she positions herself correctly and defines herself, she'll be able to get over the threshold next year. But it's going to be this is going to be one to watch, because this is really going to be a laboratory for whether Trump still has any clout that goes beyond his own base in the Republican Party.
Hey, Craig, I wanted to leave time for both you and Al to talk a little bit about Majority Leader Bob Dole, who passed away earlier this year. Any thoughts you have or stories you can share about this remarkable American hero?
You're taking us back in time to a really different era, for sure. I mean, here's a wonderful American, a war hero, a politician who came to Washington to get things done, worked with both sides of the aisle. I actually, when I think that there was a group of these individuals, Howard Baker, Bob Dole, George Herbert Walker Bush, who were in just a different era in Republican politics. And in many ways, they were competitors at all times for the highest job in the land. They all had presidential aspirations, but they had a respect for each other. And Bob Dole certainly had a great respect for his colleagues in the Senate, both Republicans and Democrats. I was asked about this the other day. I said, you know, he had such a wonderful sense of humor. He kept his composure in the toughest of times. Never lost the sense of humor. He had every reason, by the way, you know, physically to back away from literally just getting ready every morning to come to work, and yet he did it year after year after year. He sought the presidency against a governor from California, one Pete Wilson, who had me as his campaign chairman. Pete Wilson's campaign was short-lived because it was clearly Bob Dole's turn, and he was loved in the Republican Party. And he traveled, you know, throughout the country as a campaigner. I will say, when Pete Wilson dropped out, Governor Wilson endorsed him, and Dole couldn't have been nicer to Wilson or to the rest of us who were involved in that. And that was true even after I was involved with helping George Herbert Walker Bush got elected president, Dole was always friendly. My heart goes out to Elizabeth Dole, who was a colleague in the White House. It was a wonderful relationship that they shared for many, many years. And she's just a tremendous individual who has given so much in government, Red Cross, and to all kinds of causes. But he and she were virtually lifelong partners, and that was a remarkable relationship as well. So it is sad to see him go, but it certainly can be said he lived a full and a rich life, and one that has really benefited all Americans.
Al, you have the final word.
So, I mean, Bob Dole was a patriot. He was an American hero. He nearly gave his life for his country, and he devoted his life to his country. He had a sharp tongue and a wit. Sometimes it got him in trouble, like when he was asked about Craig's candidate in the early primaries of 1998. And he said, "What would you tell George Bush?" And he said, "Tell him to quit lying about my record." But he always matched that sharp tongue with a really good, raw sense of humor. And the thing that strikes me, as Craig has said, I mean, he's willing to work across party lines. We disagreed on a lot of stuff and we fought it out. But in the end, the thing about the Dole generation, and the kind of people I sort of associated with him were people like John McCain, like my old boss, Ed Muskie, who aspired to be president, never quite made it. But, you know, once their word meant something, and once, you know, they've argued out an issue, they always seem to be able to find a way to come together on a compromise. One of my favorite experiences when I was out promoting my book, I did a bunch of presidential libraries, including the Clinton Library and the George W. Bush Library, and I went up to Grand Rapids to the and to Detroit, the split Gerald Ford Library. But I also did the Dole Institute, and a friend of both Craig and mine, Bill Lacey, had this they did an annual lecture where Lacey would interview you. And that was, I want to say that was one of the most fun times I've ever had. It was just wonderful because most of those people probably, you know, voted against Bill Clinton. They certainly voted against him when Dole ran against him. But they welcomed me, and we just sat for hours telling stories because that was part of this era. That was a great era for progress. I mean, just think of some of the things we got done during that time, and passed civil rights bills, changed this country for the good. And it's sad to see it go. Well, you know, obviously Bob Dole hadn't been in the Senate for a long time, but we miss people, and we'll miss him even more as the years go on.
Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thank you so much. We'll see you next week.